I woke up at 6 in the morning to the sound of an engine idling directly outside my bedroom window, and when I pulled back the curtains, I saw a white Mercedes SUV blocking my entire driveway for the third time that week. My name is Nathan Ortega, and I had just moved into this seemingly quiet neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 months ago, thinking I had finally found the perfect place to settle down after years of apartment living. The house was a modest two-bedroom ranch with a decent front yard, and the community seemed peaceful enough during my initial visits. What I didn't know was that the HOA board president, a woman named Patricia Morrison, lived 2 houses down and had decided that my driveway was her personal parking space whenever she felt like it. The first time it happened, I thought it was an honest mistake. I had walked over to her house that Tuesday morning, knocked politely on her door, and explained that someone had parked in my driveway. Patricia had opened the door wearing a silk robe and an expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. She was probably in her early 50s, with blonde hair that looked like she spent more on it monthly than I spent on groceries. And she had this way of looking down her nose at you, even though I was a good 6 inches taller than her. "Oh, that's my car," she said, not a trace of apology in her voice. "I was just running in to grab something. I'll move it when I'm ready." I tried to stay calm. "I actually need to get to work. Could you move it now?" She looked at me like I had just asked her to donate a kidney. "Young man, do you know who I am? I'm the HOA president, and I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. If I need to park somewhere for a few minutes, I think the community can accommodate that." "It's my driveway," I said, keeping my voice level. "Private property." "Everything in this neighborhood is community property in a sense," she replied, which made absolutely no legal sense whatsoever. "You'll learn how things work around here soon enough. Welcome to Sunrise Hills." She closed the door in my face. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, she did move her car, but it took another 20 minutes, which made me late for my job at the architecture firm downtown. I worked as a junior architect, and being late during my first few months at a new position wasn't exactly the impression I wanted to make. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The second time happened 4 days later. Same white Mercedes, same blocked driveway, but this time it was 7 in the morning on a Saturday. I had plans to drive up to Flagstaff to visit my sister, and I needed to leave early to avoid the worst of the heat. I went over to Patricia's house again, and this time a man answered the door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept well in years, and I immediately felt sorry for him. "Is Patricia here?" I asked. "Her car is blocking my driveway again." He sighed deeply. "I'll get her." Patricia appeared a minute later, still in pajamas, and she had the audacity to look annoyed that I was bothering her. "What is it now? Your car is in my driveway again." "I'm having coffee," she said. "It's Saturday morning. Surely you can wait a little while." "I have somewhere to be," I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. "This is the second time. Please don't park in my driveway anymore." "Or what?" she asked, and there was a challenge in her voice that I didn't like. "Or I'll have it towed," I said. "It's my property, and in Arizona I have every right to do that." She laughed, actually laughed in my face. "You're going to have the HOA president's car towed. Good luck with that. I know every towing company in the area, and trust me, they're not going to cross me for some newcomer who doesn't understand how things work here." That's when I realized this wasn't going to be resolved through polite conversation. Patricia Morrison had decided that my driveway was hers to use whenever she wanted, and she genuinely believed her position as HOA president gave her some kind of authority over private property. I went back home, looked up Arizona property laws on my phone, and confirmed what I already knew. My driveway was private property, and I absolutely had the right to have unauthorized vehicles towed, regardless of who owned them. I called a towing company called Desert Tow Services, explained the situation, and asked if they could send someone out. The dispatcher hesitated when I mentioned the address, which made me think Patricia might have been telling the truth about knowing the local companies. But I was persistent, and eventually they agreed to send a truck. The tow truck arrived 40 minutes later. By that time, Patricia had come outside and was standing on her front lawn with her arms crossed, watching. The driver, a guy named Miguel who looked like he'd dealt with this kind of thing before, approached me first. "You the homeowner?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That Mercedes has been blocking my driveway for over an hour now. I need it removed." He nodded, walked over to inspect the vehicle, took some photos with his phone, and then started setting up his truck. Patricia marched over immediately, her face red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm towing this vehicle," Miguel said calmly. "It's blocking a private driveway." "I'm the HOA president," Patricia announced, as if that was supposed to mean something to him. "You can't tow my car." "Madam, HOA doesn't override private property rights," Miguel explained, which I appreciated. "If you want your vehicle back, you'll need to go to the impound lot on East McKellips Road. They'll explain the fees and process there." "This is ridiculous," Patricia shouted. She turned to me. "You're going to regret this. I'll make your life hell in this neighborhood." "All I want is for you to stop parking in my driveway," I said. "That's literally all you have to do." Miguel finished hooking up the Mercedes and drove off with it. Patricia stood there sputtering with rage, and then she stormed back into her house. I went inside, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. I had been within my rights to have the car towed, but I also knew I had just made an enemy of the most powerful person in the neighborhood HOA. That afternoon, I received my first violation notice. It was delivered by hand, slipped under my door while I was in the backyard. The notice claimed that my trash cans were visible from the street, which violated HOA Code Section 4.7.2, and I was being fined $50. The thing was, my trash cans were in my garage, where they had been since I moved in. I took photos to document this, and sent an email to the HOA email address listed on the notice, explaining that the violation was incorrect and requesting the fine be waived. The response came from Patricia herself. "Violation stands. Payment due within 30 days. Future violations will result in increased fines. Regards, Patricia Morrison, HOA President." I called an emergency meeting with my neighbor to the left, an older gentleman named Richard who had lived there for 8 years. Richard was in his 60s, retired from teaching high school mathematics, and he had a calm, measured way of speaking that I found reassuring. "Patricia's done this before," Richard told me over coffee on his back patio. "Anyone who crosses her ends up with mysterious violations. Last year, the Hendersons 3 streets over complained about her cutting through their yard as a shortcut to the community pool. Within a month, they had 15 different violations, everything from lawn height to exterior paint colors that supposedly didn't match approved HOA standards." "Can she actually do that?" I asked. "Just make up violations?" "She shouldn't be able to, but she does," Richard said. "The HOA board is supposed to have 5 members, but the other 4 are basically her friends who rubber stamp whatever she wants. Nobody wants to run against them because, well, you see what happens to people who cause problems." "So what did the Hendersons do?" "They moved," Richard said quietly. "Sold their house and left. Patricia considers it a victory." I sat there processing this information. I had just bought this house 6 months ago, spent my entire savings on the down payment, and I wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA president drive me out. But I also needed to be smart about this. If Patricia wanted a war, I wasn't going to give her one. I was just going to enforce my property rights every single time she violated them. The third time her Mercedes appeared in my driveway was the following Tuesday. I woke up at 6:15, saw the white SUV blocking my exit, and immediately called Desert Tow Services. This time, the dispatcher recognized my address. "Same vehicle as last week?" she asked. "Same vehicle, same owner, same problem," I confirmed. "We'll have someone there in 30 minutes. I got dressed, made coffee, and waited. Patricia must have seen the tow truck coming because she burst out of her house in yoga pants and a tank top, her hair still wet from a shower. She was screaming before she even reached the street. "You've got to be kidding me. You had my car towed again." "You parked in my driveway again," I said, standing on my front porch with my coffee mug. "I told you what would happen." "This is harassment," she shouted. "I'm going to file a complaint with the county." "Filing a complaint because your car got towed from someone else's private property." I said, "Let me know how that works out for you." The tow truck driver that morning was a different guy, younger, with a name tag that said Brandon. He worked quickly, probably wanting to avoid the drama, and Patricia's Mercedes was hooked up and gone within 10 minutes. She stood in the middle of the street, hands on her hips, glaring at me with such intense hatred that I actually felt a little unsettled. "You're done in this neighborhood," she said, her voice low and threatening. "I'm going to make you wish you never moved here." I went inside without responding. I had work to get to, and I wasn't going to let her theatrics affect my day. But over the next 2 weeks, the violation notices came fast and hard. I received citations for having outdoor lights that were too bright, for a mailbox that was improperly maintained, even though it was the same mailbox that came with the house, for parking my own car on the street overnight, which was apparently against HOA rules I had never been informed about, and even for having a doormat that was the wrong color. Each fine was $50. I contested every single one through email, providing photographic evidence and pointing out the absurdity of the claims. Patricia responded to none of them personally, but the fines kept being upheld. By the end of the second week, I was looking at over $400 in bogus fines. That's when I decided to fight back properly. I made an appointment with a real estate attorney named Jennifer Rosenberg, whose office was in downtown Phoenix. Jennifer was in her 40s, sharp as a tack, and she specialized in HOA disputes. After I explained the situation, showing her all the violation notices and the timeline of events, she leaned back in her chair and nodded. "You have a clear case of HOA harassment and abuse of authority," Jennifer said. "These violations are frivolous, and the pattern suggests retaliation. The towing of her vehicle from your private driveway was completely legal. Do you have documentation of everything?" "Photos, emails, the violation notices themselves," I said. "I've been documenting everything since the second towing." "Good," she said. "Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to Patricia Morrison and the HOA board, making it clear that further harassment will result in legal action. Second, we're going to file a complaint with the county regarding the fraudulent fines. Third, and this is important, you need to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. If she parks in your driveway, have her towed, every single time." "Won't that just make things worse?" I asked. "It'll make things come to a head faster," Jennifer explained. "Right now, she thinks she can bully you into submission through fines and intimidation. But every time you have her car towed legally, It demonstrates that she's the one violating the law, not you. It builds our case and shows a pattern of her believing she's above the rules. I left Jennifer's office feeling better than I had in weeks. The cease and desist letter went out 2 days later via certified mail. I made sure to be home when Patricia signed for it, watching through my front window as the mail carrier handed her the envelope. The look on her face when she saw it was from a law firm was priceless. For 3 glorious days, there were no violation notices and no Mercedes in my driveway. I started to think maybe the legal pressure had actually worked. Then, on Saturday morning, I woke up to find not only Patricia's Mercedes blocking my driveway, but also a silver Lexus belonging to another HOA board member, a woman named Deborah who lived on the next street over. Both vehicles were parked in such a way that I couldn't possibly get my car out. I took photos from multiple angles, called Desert Tow Services, and requested 2 trucks. Then I called Jennifer and left her a voicemail explaining what was happening. While I waited for the tow trucks, Patricia and Deborah emerged from Patricia's house, clearly having planned this together. They stood on the sidewalk, watching me with satisfied expressions. "Going somewhere?" Patricia called out. "Having both your cars towed," I replied. "Thanks for making it easy by parking them together. This is getting expensive for you, isn't it?" Deborah said, and I realized they thought I was paying for the towing. They had no idea how private property towing worked. "I don't pay anything," I explained, perhaps more cheerfully than necessary. "You pay the towing company to get your cars back, every time. Plus storage fees if you don't pick them up right away." I watched the realization dawn on their faces. Patricia had clearly convinced Deborah that having multiple cars towed would somehow bankrupt me or teach me a lesson, but instead, they were just racking up their own expenses. The first tow truck arrived within 20 minutes, and the second came 10 minutes after that. Both drivers recognized my address by now, and they worked with practiced efficiency. Patricia tried a different tactic this time. Those vehicles weren't blocking the driveway, they were on the street. But the photos I had taken clearly showed both vehicles with their rear bumpers extending into my driveway entrance, and the tow truck drivers confirmed this. By Arizona law, blocking any portion of a driveway entrance was grounds for towing. Both cars were hooked up and driven away while Patricia and Deborah stood there fuming. "You're going to lose your house over this," Patricia said, her voice shaking with anger. "I'll make sure the HOA fines you into foreclosure." "That's a threat," I said calmly. "I'm documenting this conversation, by the way. My attorney will be very interested." That was a bluff. I wasn't recording anything, but Patricia went pale and grabbed Deborah's arm, pulling her back toward the house. I went inside and immediately called Jennifer, catching her this time instead of leaving a voicemail. "She just threatened to fine me into foreclosure," I told her, "in front of another witness." "Perfect," Jennifer said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "That's actionable. I'm going to file for a restraining order and an injunction against the HOA. We're also going to request an emergency hearing with the county to review the HOA's governance practices. This has gone far enough." The following Monday, I received a notice that the HOA was calling an emergency meeting to discuss ongoing community disturbances. The meeting was scheduled for that Wednesday evening at 7, to be held in the community clubhouse. The notice didn't specifically mention me, but it was pretty obvious what the disturbance was. I forwarded the notice to Jennifer, who told me to absolutely attend the meeting and to keep my phone ready to record if necessary. Arizona was a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing others. I spent Tuesday evening preparing, reviewing all my documentation, and making sure I had everything organized. Wednesday evening arrived, and I walked to the community clubhouse at 6:50. The clubhouse was a small building near the neighborhood pool, with a main room that had a kitchen on one end and a small stage on the other. About 30 residents were already there, seated in folding chairs arranged in rows. Patricia sat at a table on the stage with the 4 other board members: Deborah, a man named Frank, another woman named Susan, and a younger guy named Todd who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I took a seat in the back row and immediately felt the stares. Several residents turned to look at me, and I could hear whispers. Richard, my neighbor, gave me an encouraging nod from a few rows ahead. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp, going through some standard HOA business about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. Then she got to what everyone was really there for. We need to address a serious issue that's been disrupting our peaceful community, Patricia began, and her eyes locked onto me. We have a resident who has been repeatedly having vehicles towed in an aggressive and unnecessary manner. This hostile behavior is creating tension and making our neighborhood feel unsafe. A few people murmured in agreement. I kept my expression neutral and my phone recording in my pocket. The HOA board believes that residents should work together to resolve disputes, not immediately resort to extreme measures like towing, Patricia continued. We're proposing a new community rule that would require residents to attempt to contact vehicle owners before calling for a tow, giving them at least 2 hours to move their vehicle. I raised my hand. Patricia tried to ignore me, but several people had turned to look, and she couldn't pretend she didn't see it. Yes, she said coldly. I stood up. Nathan Ortega, 4427 Desert Bloom Drive. I'd like to address the board and the community about this issue. I don't think that's necessary, Patricia said quickly. Actually, HOA bylaws require that residents be allowed to speak during community meetings, I said, pulling out a copy of the bylaws I had downloaded and printed. Section 8.3, Resident Participation in Meetings. Todd, the younger board member, leaned over to Patricia and whispered something. She looked furious but nodded curtly. Fine. 2 minutes. I walked to the front of the room, very aware that everyone was watching me. I want to be clear about what's actually happening here. I'm not randomly towing vehicles. I'm having one specific vehicle towed, belonging to Mrs. Morrison, because she repeatedly parks in my private driveway, blocking me from leaving my own property. This isn't a community dispute. This is someone repeatedly trespassing on private property. It's not trespassing, Patricia interjected. It's a parking inconvenience that could be resolved with a simple conversation. I did try conversation, I said. The first 2 times, Mrs. Morrison told me that, as HOA president, she could park wherever she wanted, and that I needed to learn how things work here. When conversation failed, I exercised my legal right as a property owner to have unauthorized vehicles removed from my private driveway. Several residents exchanged glances. This was clearly news to some of them. Furthermore, I continued, since I started enforcing my property rights, I've received over $400 in fraudulent HOA fines for violations that don't exist. I've been cited for trash cans that weren't visible, lights that weren't too bright, and a doormat that was supposedly the wrong color. Every single fine came after I had Mrs. Morrison's car towed. This is textbook retaliation and harassment. Those violations were legitimate, Patricia said, her face reddening. You're not above the HOA rules just because you're new here. I've documented everything, I said, holding up a folder of printed photos and emails. I have photographs proving that the violations were fabricated. I've also retained an attorney who specializes in HOA disputes, and we're currently in the process of filing complaints with the county about the HOA's governance practices." The room erupted in whispers. Frank, one of the other board members, looked uncomfortable. Susan was whispering urgently to Deborah. Todd just looked down at the table. "Your 2 minutes are up," Patricia said, standing. "Sit down." "I will," I said, "but I want everyone here to understand something. I'm not the problem. The problem is an HOA president who thinks her position gives her authority over private property and who retaliates against residents who stand up for their legal rights. If this proposed rule passes, it would effectively eliminate property owners' rights to control their own driveways. Think about what that means for you." I sat down. The meeting devolved into chaos. Several residents started asking questions, wanting to know more about the violations and the towing incidents. Patricia tried to regain control, but it was clear she had lost the room. Richard stood up and made a motion to table the proposed parking rule until the next meeting, giving residents time to review the current bylaws. The motion was seconded by 3 other people, and despite Patricia's objections, it passed by a show of hands. The meeting ended shortly after that. As people filed out, several residents approached me. Some were supportive, thanking me for standing up to Patricia. Others were more cautious, clearly afraid of becoming her next target but sympathetic to my situation. Richard clapped me on the shoulder. "That took guts," he said. "I don't think anyone's ever challenged her like that in a public meeting." "I'm just tired of being harassed," I said. "I bought a house. I should be able to park in my own driveway without someone else deciding they have more right to it than I do." Patricia left without speaking to anyone, Deborah trailing behind her. I went home feeling like maybe, just maybe, I had turned a corner. But I should have known Patricia Morrison wasn't the type to give up easily. The next morning, I found my car had been booted. An actual wheel boot, locked onto my front driver's side tire, with a notice attached claiming it was parked illegally in the HOA community. The thing was, my car was in my own driveway, on my private property. I took photos immediately and called Jennifer before I even called the number on the boot notice. "She did what?" Jennifer asked, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "Booted my car, in my own driveway." "That's a legal seizure of property," Jennifer said. "Don't call the number on the boot. I'm calling the police right now. This crosses a line into criminal activity." 2 Scottsdale police officers arrived within 40 minutes. I showed them the boot, explained the situation, and provided the timeline of harassment leading up to this point. The officers took photos, ran the serial number on the boot, and determined it had been purchased from a security supply company. They asked if I knew who might have done this. "I have a strong suspicion it was Patricia Morrison, the HOA president," I said. "She lives 2 houses down. We've been in an ongoing dispute about her parking in my driveway." One of the officers, a woman named Officer Martinez, went to speak with Patricia while the other officer, Officer Chen, stayed with me and took my statement. About 15 minutes later, Officer Martinez returned with Patricia, who was now dressed in expensive casual wear and wearing large sunglasses despite it being 8 in the morning. "Mrs. Morrison claims she has no knowledge of the boot," Officer Martinez said. "However, she did admit that the HOA has recently purchased boots for enforcement of parking violations." "On private property?" I asked. "How is that legal?" "It's not," Officer Chen said flatly. He turned to Patricia. "Madam, HOA authority doesn't extend to booting vehicles on private property. If this boot came from HOA equipment, that's a legal seizure." "I didn't personally put the boot there," Patricia said, her voice icy. "Perhaps one of our security volunteers made a mistake." "Security volunteers?" I asked. Since when does the HOA have security volunteers? We're implementing new safety measures, Patricia said. Obviously, someone got overzealous and made an error in judgment. An error that just happens to target the one person you've been in dispute with, Officer Martinez said. Mrs. Morrison, we're going to need to see the HOA's boot equipment and documentation of who had access to it. Patricia's face went even paler behind her sunglasses. I'll need to check with our storage facility. We can wait, Officer Chen said. It took Patricia nearly an hour to return with the boot key and documentation. During that time, more neighbors came out to see what was happening. Richard stood on his lawn, watching with his arms crossed. The Johnsons from across the street were on their porch, whispering to each other. This was turning into the neighborhood spectacle of the year. When Patricia finally came back, she was accompanied by Frank, the male board member. Frank looked miserable and was carrying a clipboard with papers. Officer Martinez reviewed the documentation, while Officer Chen removed the boot from my car. According to this, Officer Martinez said, the HOA purchased 3 boots last month. They're checked out by board members through a sign-out system. The most recent checkout was yesterday evening at 6:30 to a Patricia Morrison. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That must be a mistake in the paperwork. It's your signature, Officer Martinez said, holding up the page. I may have checked it out for inventory purposes, Patricia stammered, but I didn't place it on his vehicle. Then who did? Officer Chen asked. Because this boot was placed on Mr. Ortega's vehicle sometime between 11 last night and 6 this morning. You checked it out at 6:30 yesterday evening, and according to this log, you haven't checked it back in. Frank suddenly spoke up, his voice quiet. Patricia, just tell them the truth. Patricia whirled on him. Shut up, Frank. I'm not losing my career over this, Frank said, looking at the officers. I'm a CPA. I can't have a criminal record. Patricia told me yesterday that she was going to teach him a lesson. I thought she meant another violation notice, not this. Frank, Patricia shrieked. Officer Martinez held up a hand. Mr. Ortega, do you want to press charges for illegal seizure of property and trespassing? I looked at Patricia, who was now shaking with either rage or fear. I couldn't tell which. Part of me wanted to just let it go, to be done with the whole mess. But then I thought about the hundreds of dollars in fraudulent fines, the harassment, the threat to fine me into foreclosure, and the smug look on her face every time she had parked in my driveway. Yes, I said. I want to press charges. Patricia was arrested that morning. The officers handcuffed her right there in the street, read her rights, and put her in the back of the patrol car. She was screaming about lawsuits and wrongful arrest the entire time. Deborah came running from wherever she had been, demanding to know what was happening, but the officers told her to step back. It was the most surreal morning of my life. The next few days were a whirlwind. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some residents were shocked that Patricia had gone that far. Others, I learned, had been waiting for something like this to happen for years. The HOA held an emergency meeting without Patricia, and the remaining board members voted to place her on immediate suspension pending the outcome of the criminal case. Jennifer filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf against both Patricia personally and the HOA for harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority. The fraudulent fines were submitted as evidence, along with documentation of every towing incident and all the communication between Patricia and me. The county also launched an investigation into the HOA's governance practices, which uncovered a whole host of other issues, including financial irregularities and multiple complaints that had been suppressed. Patricia was charged with criminal trespassing and illegal seizure of property. Her lawyer tried to get the charges reduced, arguing that it was a civil HOA dispute that had gotten out of hand, but the prosecutor wasn't having it. The boot on my car, placed on private property in the middle of the night, was clear-cut criminal activity. The case went to court 3 months later. I testified about everything, from the first time Patricia parked in my driveway to the morning I found my car booted. Frank testified too, explaining how Patricia had become increasingly erratic about enforcing HOA rules against residents she didn't like. Richard took the stand and described years of Patricia's behavior, including dozens of residents who had moved away because of her harassment. Even Deborah, trying to save herself, testified that Patricia had pressured her into parking in my driveway that one Saturday morning. The judge was not sympathetic to Patricia. In his ruling, he stated that HOA authority carried responsibility, not immunity from the law, and that Patricia had systematically abused her position to harass a resident who had done nothing wrong, except enforce his legal property rights. She was convicted on both charges, sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended to probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to me for all the fraudulent fines plus damages. The civil lawsuit settled a month after the criminal case concluded. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, but Patricia had to pay a significant portion out of pocket. The settlement included compensation for the fines, legal fees, and emotional distress, plus an agreement that Patricia would permanently resign from the HOA board and any position of authority within the community. But the real victory came in the changes that followed. The county investigation resulted in a complete overhaul of the HOA board. Elections were held, and 5 new members were voted in, including Richard. The new board immediately repealed several of the more ridiculous rules Patricia had implemented over the years, and established a proper appeals process for violations. They also implemented term limits and oversight requirements to prevent any one person from accumulating that much unchecked power again. As for Patricia, she stayed in the neighborhood for about 6 months after the settlement, but she was essentially ostracized. No one wanted to associate with her, and she couldn't walk to her mailbox without someone giving her a cold stare. Her husband, the exhausted-looking man I had met that second morning, filed for divorce 4 months after the criminal trial. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he told his lawyer he had been wanting to leave for years, but Patricia had always threatened to destroy him financially if he tried. Patricia finally moved out on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I watched from my window as movers loaded her belongings into a truck. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't look back at the neighborhood she had ruled over for 15 years. She just got in her white Mercedes, which I noticed had a new dent in the rear bumper, probably from one of the towings, and drove away. I never saw her park in my driveway again. In fact, I never saw her at all after that day. Someone told me she moved to Tucson, but I never bothered to verify it. She was gone, and that was all that mattered. The neighborhood changed after Patricia left. It became friendlier, more relaxed. People actually talked to each other instead of worrying about who might report them for a violation. The new HOA board focused on genuine community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, fixed the community pool that had been falling into disrepair, and even started a community garden. Richard and I became good friends. We had a standing Tuesday night arrangement where we'd grill dinner and watch whatever game was on TV. He told me once that what I had done, standing up to Patricia and seeing it through to the end, had inspired several other residents to be more active in the community. People weren't afraid anymore. The towing company, Desert Tow Services, actually sent me a Christmas card that year. Miguel, the first driver who had towed Patricia's Mercedes, wrote a note saying that dealing with HOA disputes was the worst part of his job, but watching someone stand up for their rights and win made it worthwhile. I hung the card on my refrigerator. I still live in that house on Desert Bloom Drive in Scottsdale. I've made a lot of improvements over the years. A new deck in the back, updated landscaping in the front, and I even added a small fountain that the HOA board actually complimented me on. My driveway has never been blocked since that last morning when Patricia was arrested. I park there every single day without any problems whatsoever. Sometimes I think about those few months of constant conflict, the stress of waking up wondering if my driveway would be blocked or what ridiculous violation notice I'd receive next. It was exhausting and infuriating, and there were definitely moments when I considered just giving up and moving somewhere else. But I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I stood my ground, because the thing is, bullies only win when people let them. Patricia Morrison had spent 15 years believing she was untouchable, that her position as HOA president gave her authority over everyone and everything in the neighborhood. She had gotten away with it because most people chose to either comply or leave rather than fight back. And I understand why. Fighting back is hard, it's expensive, it's stressful. It takes time and energy that most people would rather spend on literally anything else. But sometimes fighting back is necessary. Not because you want conflict, but because giving in to bullies just empowers them to keep bullying. Every person who moved away because of Patricia's harassment, every resident who paid fraudulent fines rather than contest them, every time someone let her park wherever she wanted just to avoid confrontation, it reinforced her belief that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I didn't set out to take down the HOA president. I just wanted to park in my own driveway. But when Patricia decided that my property rights were less important than her convenience, and when she responded to my perfectly legal actions with harassment and retaliation, she left me no choice but to fight back. And I'm fortunate that I had the resources to do it, the savings to pay for a lawyer, the documentation to prove my case, and the personality type that doesn't back down when someone tries to push me around. The neighborhood is better now without Patricia's iron-fisted rule. The HOA actually functions the way it's supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable rules that keep the community pleasant without being oppressive. I can have friends over without worrying that someone will report my guests' cars. I can put up holiday decorations without checking 17 different rules about approved colors and sizes. I can live in my house, which I own, without feeling like I'm constantly being watched and judged by someone looking for an excuse to fine me. And every morning when I walk out to my car, parked in my driveway on my property, I feel a little bit of satisfaction knowing that I didn't let someone bully me out of my home. I stood up for myself, I followed through, and I won. Not because I'm special or brave, but because I was right and I was willing to prove it. Patricia Morrison learned an expensive lesson about the limits of HOA authority and the consequences of harassment. The neighborhood learned that board members aren't untouchable and that residents have rights that must be respected. And I learned that sometimes the only way to deal with a Karen who thinks she owns everything is to show her, repeatedly if necessary, that she doesn't. My driveway is mine. It always was. And now everyone knows it, especially Patricia Morrison, wherever she is now. I hope she thinks about it every time she parks somewhere, remembers the feeling of watching her Mercedes get towed again and again, because she couldn't accept that her position didn't grant her ownership of other people's property. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I honestly doubt it. People like Patricia rarely do, but I learned something valuable. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, is worth it. I learned that documentation is your best friend in any dispute. I learned that there are good people like Jennifer Rosenberg and Officer Martinez who will help you when you're in the right. And I learned that sometimes karma needs a little assistance in the form of a tow truck and a good lawyer. The story could have ended differently. Patricia could have simply accepted after the first towing that my driveway wasn't her parking spot and moved on with her life. We could have been neutral neighbors who nodded politely when we saw each other. But she chose escalation. She chose retaliation. She chose to abuse her authority and break the law. And she paid the price for those choices. I'm not going to pretend the whole experience didn't affect me. For months afterward, I felt anxious whenever I saw a white Mercedes anywhere. I had trouble sleeping some nights, worrying about what Patricia might do next before she finally moved away. The stress of the legal proceedings, even though I knew I was in the right, was significant, but it was worth it. Every bit of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, every moment of anxiety was worth it to reclaim my peace of mind and my property rights. And the community support that emerged once people saw that Patricia could be challenged was incredible. Neighbors I had barely spoken to before came by to share their own stories of Patricia's behavior, to thank me for doing what they hadn't been able to do, to bring me cookies and casseroles like I was recovering from surgery. The neighborhood came together in a way it never had before, united by relief that the tyrant was gone. Richard told me that he and several other long-time residents had discussed trying to remove Patricia from the board before, but they never thought they could actually do it. She had consolidated power too effectively, surrounded herself with loyal board members, and created an atmosphere where challenging her seemed impossible. It took an outsider, someone new to the neighborhood who didn't have years of conditioning about how things work here, to finally stand up and say no. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who wanted to park in his driveway and was stubborn enough not to accept that someone else thought they could stop me. But if my stubbornness helped free an entire neighborhood from years of petty tyranny, then I guess that's a pretty good outcome. These days, I'm on good terms with most of my neighbors. I serve on a couple of HOA committees, actually, helping to review and update rules to make them more reasonable and fair. I never thought I'd be voluntarily involved in HOA governance, but after everything that happened, I feel like I have a stake in making sure the organization functions properly and doesn't become a tool for someone's power trip again. The house on Desert Bloom Drive is truly home now. Not just because I own it, but because I fought for it. I fought for my right to live here in peace, to use my property as I see fit within reasonable bounds, to not be harassed or bullied by someone who thought their title made them royalty. And I won that fight. Sometimes I drive past the house Patricia used to live in. A nice young couple bought it. They have a toddler who plays in the front yard and waves at people walking by. They're friendly and normal, and they've never once parked in anyone else's driveway. The house seems happier now, if that makes sense. Less oppressive. The husband mentioned to me once that they had to do a lot of work when they moved in because things had been neglected. I wonder if Patricia was so focused on controlling everyone else that she forgot to take care of her own home. The white Mercedes is gone. The fraudulent violation notices are gone. The fear of what each new day might bring is gone. What remains is a peaceful neighborhood where people can live their lives without constantly looking over their shoulders. And a driveway that's finally, permanently, only mine to use. I still have all the documentation from that period, everything stored in a folder in my home office. The photos, the emails, the violation notices, the legal filings, even the boot that Officer Chen let me keep as evidence after the trial. I don't look at it often, but it's there, a reminder of what happened and why standing your ground matters. Every now and then, someone new moves into the neighborhood and they ask me about the HOA. They've heard stories, rumors about what happened before they arrived. I tell them the truth. I tell them about Patricia Morrison, about the parking disputes and the harassment, about standing up for property rights and seeing it through to the end. And I tell them that the HOA is different now, better now, because people learned that authority comes with accountability. Some of them look at me like I'm some kind of neighborhood legend, which is both flattering and embarrassing. I'm not a legend. I'm just Nathan Ortega, a guy who bought a house in Scottsdale and had to deal with a Karen who thought she owned the place. The only difference between me and the residents who came before is that I didn't move away. I stayed, I fought, and I made sure everyone knew that my driveway was mine. And you know what? I'd do it all again. Every towing, every legal filing, every confrontation. Because my home is my home, and no one has the right to take that away from me through intimidation or harassment. Not an HOA president, not anyone. The sun sets differently over the neighborhood now. Maybe it's just my imagination, but everything seems brighter, lighter, less oppressive. Kids ride their bikes in the streets without their parents, worrying that someone will complain about the noise. People paint their shutters in whatever approved color they actually like, instead of what Patricia liked. Dogs bark occasionally, and no one gets fined for it unless it's genuinely excessive. This is what a neighborhood should be. A community, not a dictatorship. A place where rules exist to maintain reasonable standards, not to give someone a weapon against people they don't like. A place where you can live in peace in the home you bought with your hard-earned money. And if Patricia Morrison ever thinks about coming back to Scottsdale, I hope she remembers the white Mercedes being towed away for what was ultimately the last time. And I hope she chooses to stay wherever she ended up. Because my driveway is mine, it always will be, and I've proven that I will defend it every single time. That's the end of the story. A Karen blocked my driveway daily. I had her towed every time until she not only stopped, but faced legal consequences for her harassment and abuse of authority. The neighborhood is better for it. I'm at peace in my home, and somewhere out there, Patricia Morrison has hopefully learned that being HOA president doesn't make you above the law. But somehow I doubt it. People like that rarely change. They just find new places to be terrible until someone else stands up to them. I just hope whoever encounters her next has the resources and determination to do what I did, because everyone deserves to live in their home without being bullied by someone on a power trip. My driveway remains empty except for my own car, exactly as it should be. And that's how this story ends, with me parking in my own driveway, walking into my own house and living my life in peace. It's not a dramatic ending, but it's the right one. Sometimes the best ending is just getting back to normal, to the way things should have been all along. Patricia Morrison learned that HOA authority has limits. I learned that standing your ground is worth the fight. And the neighborhood of Sunrise Hills in Scottsdale, Arizona, learned that they didn't have to accept tyranny just because it came with an official title. The towing stopped because Patricia finally understood she couldn't win. The harassment stopped because she faced real consequences. And life in my little corner of Arizona got a whole lot better once the person causing all the problems was removed from power. That's the real lesson here. Stand up for your rights. Document everything. Don't let bullies win through intimidation. And if someone keeps parking in your driveway despite being told not to, have them towed, every single time until they finally get the message. Because your property is yours, and you have every right to defend it.